I am 92 years old, and after a lifetime of caring for my son, I was told to leave the home I once called my own. At the request of his wife, my son pushed me out, and in that moment, I realized how fragile the bond of family can be when love is replaced by selfishness. Ethan Westbrook was a wealthy millionaire living in California. He had everything a person could want: a mansion, luxury cars, and a successful business. On the outside, his life seemed perfect. However, despite all his wealth, Ethan felt emotionally empty and lonely. Ethan's mother, Eleanor, was 92 years old and lived with him. She had taken care of him his whole life, providing him with love and support. But as Ethan's wealth grew, their relationship changed. He became busier with his business and began to spend less time with her. Eleanor's health started to decline as she aged. She became disabled and could no longer take care of herself as she once did. Now she needed Ethan's help more than ever. But with his focus on his work and wealth, Ethan became distant, and Eleanor felt increasingly alone and neglected. Ethan's life seemed to change the day he met Isabella. She was beautiful, elegant, and sophisticated. Her charm and confidence immediately caught his attention, and he was drawn to her in a way he had never felt before. They spent time together, went on dates, and shared many happy moments. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he had found someone who could fill the emptiness in his heart. Isabella was everything he had been looking for, and he quickly fell in love with her. After a few months of dating, Ethan decided to marry Isabella. He believed she was the answer to his loneliness, and that together they could build a happy life. He was eager to share his wealth, success, and the beautiful home he had built with her. But what he didn't realize was that Isabella wasn't interested in him for who he truly was. She was more interested in the luxurious life he could provide. As time went on, things started to change. Isabella's true personality began to show. At first, she was polite and friendly to Ethan's mother, Eleanor, but as they spent more time together, her behavior became less kind. She started to criticize Eleanor for everything. She called her a burden and complained about having to take care of her, even though Ethan's mother needed help due to her growing disability. "Why does she have to live here?" Isabella would ask, rolling her eyes. "She's just taking up space, Ethan. She should go to a care facility. I don't want her around all the time." Eleanor, who had always been a kind and loving mother, began to feel more and more isolated in her own home. Isabella would make cruel comments about her age, calling her old-fashioned and saying she didn't belong in their modern life. It hurt Eleanor deeply, but she kept quiet, not wanting to cause any problems. She'd always put Ethan first and didn't want to make him choose between her and his new wife. However, Ethan didn't see the changes. He was blinded by his love for Isabella. Every time Eleanor expressed her discomfort or sadness about the way Isabella treated her, Ethan dismissed it. He told her not to worry, and that everything would be fine. He believed that Isabella just didn't understand how much his mother meant to him. Eleanor tried her best to get along with Isabella, but it became increasingly difficult. Isabella would constantly tell Ethan that his mother was too much of a burden, and that it wasn't fair to ask her to live with them. Isabella also didn't like the fact that Eleanor needed help with simple tasks because of her disability. She wanted to live a life that was just about her and Ethan, free from the responsibilities of caring for someone else. Ethan, caught up in his own emotions and love for Isabella, refused to see the cruelty she was showing his mother. Instead of standing up for Eleanor, he began to push her aside, believing Isabella's complaints were justified. He thought that maybe his mother would be better off somewhere else, and that it would be easier if they lived without her. This caused great pain to Eleanor. She had spent her entire life taking care of Ethan, but now she felt like a stranger in her own home. She quietly suffered, hoping that one day Ethan would see the truth. But as the days passed, she began to realize that the man she had raised no longer seemed to care for her the way he once had. Ethan's blindness to Isabella's cruelty grew stronger, and the rift between him and his mother grew wider. His love for Isabella had completely overshadowed his love for his mother, and he couldn't see the damage it was causing. The conflict between Ethan, Isabella, and Eleanor started to grow worse over time. Isabella began to openly push Ethan to choose between her and his mother. She would tell him that she couldn't live in a house with Eleanor, constantly criticizing her and making it clear that she didn't want to share a life with a disabled, elderly woman. Isabella argued that their marriage would never be happy as long as Eleanor lived with them. "Ethan," Isabella would say, "you need to make a choice. It's either me or your mother. I can't keep living like this. She's always in the way, and I just can't handle it anymore." Ethan was torn. He loved Isabella deeply and wanted to make her happy, but he also loved his mother, Eleanor, who had always been there for him. However, Isabella's constant complaints started to wear on him. She would argue with him, cry, and tell him that his mother was too much of a burden. At first, Ethan tried to ignore the tension, but as Isabella pushed him harder, he began to feel more and more conflicted. Isabella's manipulations were subtle at first. She would make small, hurtful remarks about Eleanor. "Your mother doesn't understand how hard it is for us," she'd say. "She's just so old and weak. It's not fair to ask me to take care of her while you're at work." Slowly, she began to convince Ethan that his mother was holding him back from living the life he deserved. Ethan started to change. He became emotionally distant from Eleanor. He no longer spent as much time with her, and when he did, he was distracted and distant. He would tell her things like, "I'm busy, Mom," or "I'll help you later." He started avoiding her when she needed his help, telling himself that Isabella had a point. His mother was old, and maybe it was time for her to move into a nursing home, he thought. Eleanor, however, could feel the change in Ethan. It broke her heart to see her son becoming more and more like a stranger to her. She had cared for him all his life, supported him in every way, but now he seemed to be slipping away. She tried to talk to him, to tell him how hurt she was, but Ethan would brush her off, telling her not to worry. He told her that everything was fine, but she could see the truth in his eyes. He was no longer the person he had been when he was younger. Eleanor's pain grew deeper as she watched her son drift further into Isabella's world. She could see how much Isabella had changed him. She was no longer the woman who had once been kind and loving toward her, but a woman who only cared about herself and the life of luxury she could have with Ethan. Eleanor felt trapped in her own home, knowing that the one person she had always relied on, her son, was no longer on her side. Isabella didn't make things any easier. She would make passive-aggressive comments in front of Ethan, saying things like, "Oh, your mother is so needy. I don't know how you put up with her." She would also tell Ethan that Eleanor was holding him back from his true potential. "You'll never be able to live the life you deserve as long as your mother is around," she would say. "She's old, and she's not going to get any better. You need to think about your future, Ethan." Ethan, overwhelmed by the pressure from Isabella, started to withdraw even more from his mother. He felt torn between wanting to keep Isabella happy and trying to care for his mother. But every time he tried to balance the two, Isabella's demands grew stronger. Eventually he gave in to her, believing that she was right. Eleanor was just a burden, and maybe it was time for her to go. Eleanor tried to remain strong, but the pain of seeing her son change was unbearable. She had been there for him his whole life, but now she felt like she was losing him. She'd always done everything for him, but it seemed as though it wasn't enough anymore. The love that once filled their home was slowly fading, replaced by the cold distance that Ethan now showed her. As the conflict between Ethan, Isabella, and Eleanor continued to grow, Eleanor found herself in a difficult position. She couldn't understand why her son had become so distant, why he was allowing Isabella's cruelty to drive a wedge between them. She still loved him deeply, but she was beginning to realize that he had changed in ways she could no longer fix. Her heart ached as she watched him drift further away, and she knew that no matter what she did, the relationship they once had was slipping away. The tension in the house had been building for months, and it reached its breaking point one evening. Isabella, tired of dealing with Eleanor's presence and growing more frustrated with every passing day, finally demanded that Ethan choose. She couldn't stand living with his mother any longer. She didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of taking care of an elderly, disabled woman. She made it clear that something had to be done. Either Eleanor would leave, or their marriage would end. One evening, after dinner, Isabella confronted Ethan once again. "I've had enough, Ethan," she said sharply, her voice cold and demanding. "I can't keep living like this. Your mother is a burden, and I'm not going to stay in this house if she's here anymore. You need to make a choice, me or her." Ethan stood there in silence, feeling the weight of Isabella's words. He had always known that Isabella wasn't thrilled about his mother living with them, but he had hoped things would get better with time. However, now it was clear that Isabella's patience had run out, and she was not going to back down. The anger in her voice was unmistakable. "She's old, Ethan. She's not going to get better. She's only going to get worse." "She needs to go," Isabella continued, her tone relentless. "You can't keep living like this, constantly taking care of her. It's ruining everything." Ethan felt torn. His mother had always been there for him, but now he was caught in the middle of a conflict he didn't know how to resolve. He looked at Isabella, who was standing there, arms crossed, waiting for him to make a decision. He could see the anger in her eyes and hear the frustration in her voice. He could feel the pressure building, and he didn't know what to do. He had spent his whole life relying on his mother, but now he was afraid of losing Isabella. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke, his voice weak and hesitant. I don't know, Isabella," he muttered. "I love you, but I don't want to hurt my mother." Isabella wasn't willing to let Ethan off the hook that easily. "If you don't make a decision now, Ethan, I'm leaving," she said, her voice growing louder. "I can't keep living in this house with her here. You need to choose me or her." Ethan's heart raced as he looked between Isabella and his mother, who was sitting quietly in the living room, unaware of the conversation happening in the next room. He felt as if he were being torn in two, pulled between the woman he had married and the woman who had given him life. But as the tension mounted and Isabella's words rang in his ears, something inside him snapped. "Fine," Ethan said, his voice trembling with frustration. "You're right. I can't keep living like this. Mom, you need to leave." Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly, overheard the conversation. Her heart sank as she heard Ethan's words. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son, the boy she had raised and cared for all these years, was telling her to leave. She had always done everything for him, but now it seemed like he had chosen Isabella over her. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she slowly stood up, her heart breaking. She didn't say anything. She didn't argue. She simply gathered a few old clothes from her room, the ones she had worn for years, and silently walked toward the door. Ethan didn't stop her. He didn't try to apologize or explain himself. He just stood there, watching as his mother left the house. Eleanor stepped outside into the cold evening air, her heart heavy with sadness. She had spent her entire life taking care of Ethan, but now she was being forced out of the home she had helped build. She had no place to go, no family left to turn to. All she had was the broken heart of a mother who had been abandoned by the son she had loved and cared for. With no destination in mind, Eleanor walked through the streets, her legs weak and shaky. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay in that house any longer. The world felt cold and unwelcoming, and she felt so alone. Eventually, she found herself sitting on a bench in a nearby park, the tears streaming down her face. She was alone, broken-hearted, and abandoned by the one person who had once meant everything to her. Eleanor sat there, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had hoped that her son would never turn his back on her, but now she had no choice but to face the painful truth. Ethan had chosen his wife over her, and she was left to figure out what to do next. It was a cold evening when David, a young man in his 20s, was walking through the park after a long day of work. He didn't have much, just a simple job that paid the bills and a small apartment that was barely big enough for him. Life wasn't easy for David. He struggled to make ends meet, always working hard, but never getting ahead. But despite his own difficulties, David had a good heart. He always tried to help others whenever he could, even if he didn't have much to give. As he walked through the park, he noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench. Her clothes were old, and her face showed signs of sadness and exhaustion. She was holding a small bundle of clothes tightly to her chest, as though they were all she had left. David couldn't help but feel a wave of sympathy for her. He stopped and looked at the woman, unsure if he should approach her, but something inside him told him that he needed to. "Excuse me, ma'am," David said softly, his voice kind and respectful. "Are you okay? You look like you might need some help." The elderly woman looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. She wiped her tears quickly, trying to hide the pain she was feeling, but it was clear that she was struggling. I don't know where to go," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been abandoned by my son. I have no one left." David's heart broke for her. He couldn't imagine the pain she must be feeling, to be left alone in a park, with nothing but her old clothes. Despite his own difficulties, David felt a deep sense of compassion for this woman. He knew he had to do something to help. "You don't have to be alone," David said gently. "I don't have much, but I can offer you a place to stay for the night. You can come to my apartment, and I'll make sure you're safe and comfortable." Eleanor looked at him in disbelief. She had been through so much, and the kindness in David's eyes was something she hadn't seen in a long time. She was afraid to trust someone new, but David's offer seemed genuine. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what to say." David helped her to her feet, gently guiding her as they walked to his modest apartment. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and David had worked hard to make it a safe place for himself. It wasn't the grand home that she had once shared with her son, but it was a place where Eleanor could finally feel a little bit of peace. When they arrived at his apartment, David made her a cup of tea and offered her a comfortable chair. Eleanor sat down, feeling exhausted, both physically and emotionally. David sat across from her, giving her space, but also showing her that she wasn't alone anymore. "I know things must be hard for you," David said, his voice soft and comforting. "But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here to help however I can." Eleanor looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She hadn't expected anyone to offer her help, especially not a stranger. She'd been abandoned by her son, the one person she thought she could always count on. But now, here was David, a young man who didn't have much, but who was willing to help her without hesitation. Over the next few days, David took care of Eleanor, making sure she had everything she needed. He helped her with her meals, assisted her in getting around, and even took the time to listen to her stories. Eleanor shared her pain with him, telling him about a son and how she had been pushed aside in her time of need. David listened patiently, offering comfort and understanding. He never judged her or made her feel like a burden. Eleanor soon realized that despite David's own struggles, he had something much more valuable than money or wealth. He had a heart full of kindness, and he was willing to share that kindness with her. David made her feel safe again, something she hadn't felt in a long time. He provided her with a place where she could heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. David's kindness and compassion brought Eleanor comfort and peace during one of the hardest times in her life. He didn't have much to offer, but what he gave her was something far more important: love and care. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt like she mattered. She felt like she had found someone who truly cared about her well-being, and for that, she would be forever grateful. Ethan's life, which once seemed perfect, began to fall apart. His business, which had been thriving for years, started to crumble. Investments that he had carefully made over the years began to lose value. What once brought him success and stability now seemed to be slipping away from his grasp. Clients started leaving, and the company he had built began to face financial struggles. The stress of watching everything he had worked for begin to collapse was overwhelming. As his business failed, the emotional weight of losing his mother became heavier. Ethan had pushed his mother, Eleanor, out of his life, believing that Isabella would make him happier. But now, with his business crumbling and no support from his wife, Ethan was left alone, grappling with regret. He thought back to the time when his mother had always been there for him. He remembered the love and care she had given him throughout his life, and now she was gone. It was as if he had lost everything that truly mattered to him. The loneliness grew harder to bear. He was surrounded by luxury and wealth, yet he felt empty. His house, once filled with joy and laughter, was now silent. His friends and colleagues, who once admired him for his success, seemed distant. They no longer cared about him, and some even started to question his judgment as his business began to fail. Ethan knew he had made mistakes, but he felt trapped. He had no one to turn to. At the same time, Isabella, his wife, became increasingly distant. She no longer showed the affection and love she had when they first met. She was no longer interested in the life they had built together. She saw Ethan's failing business as a reflection of his worth and began to lose respect for him. Her true intentions had become clear over time. She had married Ethan for his wealth and status, not for love. As the months went by, Isabella's behavior became more cold and dismissive. She criticized Ethan for every little thing, from his business decisions to the way he looked. She would make harsh comments, telling him that he was no longer the man she had married. She would often remind him of his failed investments and how he had ruined their perfect life. But her cruelty reached its peak when one day she gave him an ultimatum. "I can't keep living like this, Ethan," Isabella said, standing in front of him one evening. "Your business is failing. You've pushed your mother away, and now you're nothing more than a shadow of the man I married. I want more than this, and I don't think you can give it to me anymore." Ethan stood there, unable to respond. He was already feeling the weight of his own mistakes, but hearing Isabella's words cut him deeper than anything else. He had always believed she was the one who would stand by him, but now, it was clear that she was only interested in what he could provide. A few weeks later, Isabella packed her things and left. She'd found someone else, another millionaire who had money, power, and success. She married him quickly, moving on without hesitation. She didn't look back or even offer Ethan an explanation. It was as if he had never mattered to her at all. Ethan was left completely alone. His wife had abandoned him, his business was falling apart, and his mother was no longer in his life. He had lost everything that once brought him happiness. His wealth, which had once defined him, now felt meaningless. The mansion that had once been a symbol of success now felt like a prison. Ethan's heart ached with regret. He realized that in his pursuit of money and success, he had lost the things that truly mattered: love, family, and happiness. The loneliness was suffocating. He spent his days wandering around the empty house, remembering the life he had once taken for granted. His business continued to spiral downward, and with no one to help him, he had to face the harsh reality that he had lost everything. Ethan now understood what he had done. He had chosen wealth over love, ambition over family, and pride over humility. And in the end, it had cost him everything. David's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. After helping Eleanor, he felt a strong sense of responsibility to make the most of his life. He didn't have much, just a small apartment and a simple job, but he was determined to work hard and create a better future for himself and for Eleanor, who had become like family to him. David started working at a local business, doing basic tasks like organizing files and handling customer inquiries. His job was not glamorous, but he approached every task with dedication. He worked long hours, always going above and beyond what was asked of him. He treated everyone he met with kindness and respect, whether they were customers or co-workers. Slowly, people began to notice David's work ethic and positive attitude. His boss, Mr. Thompson, saw something special in David. He appreciated how reliable and hard-working David was, always taking on extra work and never complaining. One day, Mr. Thompson called David into his office. "David," he said, "I've been watching you for a while now, and I think you've got what it takes to go further. I'd like to offer you a position as a manager. You've earned it." David was shocked, but grateful. This promotion was a huge step up from the humble job he had started with. It meant more responsibility and a higher salary, but it also showed that his hard work had paid off. David accepted the offer without hesitation. With his new role as a manager, David took on more challenges. He worked even harder, learning about the business, managing teams, and making decisions that would help the company grow. He knew he had to continue proving himself, but he was driven by a sense of purpose. He wanted to build a better life, not just for himself, but for Eleanor as well. She had supported him during his hardest days, and he wanted to repay her kindness by showing her that hard work and integrity could lead to success. Over time, David's contributions helped the business grow. He was trusted more by the company's leadership, and his ideas began to make a real impact. Eventually, David was given an opportunity to buy into the company. With the savings he had carefully accumulated, he was able to invest and become a partial owner. It wasn't easy, but he had worked so hard to reach this point. His dedication had finally paid off. As a part owner, David was able to make decisions that would shape the future of the company. He focused on creating a positive work environment, treating employees with respect, and ensuring the company's growth was built on integrity and strong values. His efforts helped the business become more successful, and it didn't take long before David was able to buy out the remaining shares, becoming the full owner of the company. With this new success, David had not only achieved financial stability, but he had also gained something more important: respect. He had built his success from the ground up, using hard work, kindness, and a strong moral compass. He was proud of how far he had come, but he knew he couldn't have done it without the support of Eleanor. Eleanor, who had been by David's side from the beginning, couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. She watched as David transformed from a young man with little more than hope into a successful businessman who had earned everything he had. She had always believed in him, and now she could see that his success was not just based on his business skills, but on his character. David had become a man of integrity, someone who had never lost sight of the values that truly mattered. As the years went by, David continued to lead the company with honesty and respect, and his business grew even more. Eleanor remained by his side, sharing in his happiness and success. She had watched him become the man she always knew he could be, and her heart swelled with pride. She knew that David's success wasn't just about the money or the company. It was about the kindness, respect, and hard work that had brought him to this point. David's rise to success was a true testament to the power of hard work, integrity, and kindness. He had started with very little, but had built something truly meaningful. And through it all, he had never forgotten the lessons of love and care that had guided him along the way. Ethan stood alone in the vast emptiness of his mansion, staring out the window at the view he once admired so much. The house that had once been filled with laughter, warmth, and the hustle of a busy life now stood silent and cold. The grand rooms, the luxurious furniture, the expensive decorations, all of it seemed meaningless now. The wealth that had once defined him, that he had worked so hard to accumulate, no longer brought him any comfort. His eyes wandered to the empty spaces where his mother's gentle presence used to fill the house with love, and where his wife, Isabella, once shared in the life he had so carefully built. But now, all that was left was an empty shell, a reminder of everything Ethan had lost. Isabella was gone, having left him for another man. She had married someone wealthier, someone who could offer her the lifestyle she had always wanted. Ethan had been nothing more than a means to an end, his money, his status, his success. But once the money and success began to slip away, so did she. She had abandoned him without a second thought, leaving him to face the harsh truth. She had never truly loved him. She had loved the life he could provide, not him as a person. As if that wasn't enough, Ethan had lost his mother as well. He had pushed her away, believing that Isabella was the key to his happiness, that her love would fill the void he felt. But instead, he had driven away the one person who truly cared for him. His mother had always been there, offering unconditional love and support. Yet blinded by his own desires for wealth and status, he had chosen to ignore her needs and push her out of his life. Now she was gone, and with her, a part of Ethan's soul. He could still hear her soft voice, the gentle words of advice she had tried to give him, the way she had always made him feel safe and loved. But it was too late. He had pushed her out of the house, out of his life, and now he would never get the chance to make things right. Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the days when his mother was still in the house, when he was so focused on his work and his business that he hardly noticed the pain he was causing her. He had been so consumed with the pursuit of success, so focused on impressing the world with his wealth and power, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. He had taken his mother's love for granted, never realizing that her quiet presence was the very thing that had kept him grounded. Now, with his business collapsing and no one to share his wealth with, Ethan felt the weight of his choices. His company, once thriving, was now on the verge of bankruptcy. His employees had left, his clients had moved on, and the empire he had built was crumbling. The financial freedom he had once enjoyed was slipping away, and he could feel his grip on everything he had worked for loosening. Ethan sat down in the middle of the living room, looking around at the empty space. The sound of his own breathing seemed to echo in the silence. He had lost everything: his wealth, his wife, and his mother. All the things he thought would bring him happiness and fulfillment had turned to dust. He had chosen money and status over love and family, and now he was paying the price. The mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison. His wealth no longer mattered. It couldn't bring him happiness, and it certainly couldn't bring back the people he had pushed away. Ethan realized too late the importance of love, family, and the simple moments that truly made life meaningful. The lavish parties, the expensive vacations, and the endless pursuit of wealth had all been distractions. He had surrounded himself with things that looked good on the outside, but were hollow on the inside. He'd ignored the very things that could have filled his life with true joy: the love of his mother, the support of a wife who truly cared, and the relationships that mattered most. As he sat in the empty mansion, Ethan knew that he could never get back what he had lost. He could never undo the mistakes he had made. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had sacrificed the most important things in life for things that didn't matter at all. And now he was alone, with nothing but the empty walls of his mansion to remind him of the life he had once had. It was a painful lesson, one that Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. But it was too late to change the past. All he could do now was live with the consequences of his choices, forever haunted by the emptiness that came from choosing wealth over love and family. David's life had been a journey of hard work, dedication, and kindness. And now, after years of effort, it was beginning to pay off. He had worked his way up from a humble job to becoming the owner of the company. His success was not built on luck or shortcuts. It was the result of his unwavering commitment and his belief that treating others with kindness and respect was the key to true success. As David's business grew, so did his ability to provide a better life for himself and for Eleanor. He had always promised her that things would get better, that he would build a future where they both could live in peace and happiness. Now, with the company flourishing, David was able to give Eleanor the comfort and security she deserved after all the years of hardship. He moved them both into a cozy, comfortable home, a place where they could relax and enjoy life without the burdens of the past. Eleanor, who had seen so many difficult days in her life, finally found peace. She had been through so much pain, but now, in David's care, she felt safe and loved. She had always believed in him, even when things were tough, and now she saw the fruits of his hard work and determination. David treated her with such love and respect, always making sure she was comfortable and cared for. In return, Eleanor was proud of him, knowing that he had worked hard to build something meaningful, not just for himself, but for both of them. Eleanor often reflected on the life she had lived with Ethan. She had spent so many years taking care of her son, hoping that he would appreciate her sacrifices. But after everything that had happened, she realized that sometimes love wasn't enough when it wasn't returned in the right way. Her time with David had shown her what true love and respect felt like. David wasn't just kind to her because he felt obligated. He genuinely cared about her well-being. He treated her with the dignity she had always wanted, and she felt grateful every day for the kindness he had shown her. David's rise to success had also brought him a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He had never been motivated by money alone. From the very beginning, he had wanted to prove that kindness and hard work could lead to a better life. Now, as a successful businessman, David realized that true wealth wasn't about the numbers in his bank account, the size of his house, or the cars he drove. It was about the relationships he had built, the love he had shared, and the positive impact he had made on the lives of those around him. Every day, David worked hard to keep his company running smoothly, but he never lost sight of what truly mattered. He always made time for Eleanor, ensuring that she was happy and well cared for. They spent their evenings together, enjoying quiet moments, reminiscing about the past, and looking forward to the future. David knew that this, more than anything else, was what made his life rich. David's story became a reminder to those around him that success isn't always measured by the amount of money you make or the position you hold in society. True success, he had learned, is about the connections you build with others, the love you give, and the lives you touch. He had worked hard to build his wealth, but it was the love and respect he had for Eleanor and the bond they shared that made him truly wealthy. As the years passed, David continued to lead the company with integrity, always focusing on creating a positive work environment for his employees. He made sure that the values of kindness, respect, and hard work were at the heart of the business. And through it all, Eleanor remained by his side, a constant source of support and pride. Together, David and Eleanor built a fulfilling and loving life. They didn't have the extravagance that Ethan had once craved, but they had something far more valuable, a deep, genuine connection, and a sense of peace that money could never buy. They knew that the true wealth in life comes not from what you own, but from the love and relationships you nurture. David's success wasn't just about the business he had built, it was about the life he had created with the people who truly mattered to him. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all.